The hum of the starship's engines was a familiar sound, a constant in the cold silence of space. Captain Arden Rice stood by the command console, her hand steady on the controls, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of stars that surrounded them. It had been a routine mission, one of many in a long line of diplomatic assignments to smooth over tensions between the human colonies and the Galactic Coalition. The quiet buzz of the crew working behind her was comforting, but Arden knew better than to let her guard down. Space had a way of turning routine into chaos when least expected. "Captain," a voice crackled over the comm, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Cade, her tactical officer, his voice tight with urgency. "You're going to want to see this." Arden turned sharply, her instincts kicking in. She hurried to the communication station, where Cade had already pulled up a live feed. The screen flickered, displaying the faint outlines of an alien ship, dark and battered, drifting slowly through the void. "It's a distress signal," Cade said, his brow furrowing. "From a sector we don't usually go near. The coordinates, they're far off the trade routes. It's coming from one of the last systems that has been off the radar for years." Arden's gut tightened. There was something about the way Cade said, "off the radar," that made her uneasy. The galaxy had been a dangerous place ever since humanity had stepped into its chaotic fold. But there was something worse than danger out there, something that kept whole systems hidden from even the most advanced scanners, something worth avoiding. "Can we get a clear translation?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. Cade hesitated. "It's fragmented, Captain. The transmission is ancient. Whatever it is, they've been waiting a long time for help." Arden's gaze locked on the screen. The signal was weak, broken up by static, but there was no mistaking the desperation in the voice that came through next. The words were distorted, but they carried a clear message. "The Xal-Far. They've returned. Help us." Arden's blood ran cold. She'd heard stories about the Xal-Far, legends of an ancient race of hunters so deadly that they wiped out entire species for sport. They had vanished long ago, leaving behind nothing but ruins and memories. But no one had seen them in over a century. No one had dared speak their name. Until now. "Is it a trap?" Cade asked, sensing her unease. Arden narrowed her eyes, analyzing the data. The signal was real. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't a hoax or a trap. It was a call for help. A call from the deepest corners of space, from a place humanity hadn't dared to explore. "Prepare the crew," she said, her voice steady. "We're going in." The crew scrambled into action, each person moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Arden felt a flicker of doubt. After all, no one knew what lay ahead. But doubt wasn't something she had the luxury of indulging. Not now. The Xal-Far's return meant something much worse than the usual galactic politics. It meant the survival of entire civilizations was on the line. The starship's engines powered up, and the stars outside the viewport stretched into lines as they jumped into faster-than-light travel. Arden stood at the helm, her fingers gripping the controls, her mind racing with possibilities. The galaxy had never seen a threat like the Xal-Far, and she had no idea what kind of nightmare awaited them. But one thing was certain. Humanity was about to face its toughest challenge yet. And Arden Rice, Earth's finest officer, was going to make sure they weren't going down without a fight. The moment the ship dropped out of hyperspace, the chill of the unknown settled in like a cold hand on the back of Arden's neck. The stars ahead were distant, muted by a thick veil of dust and gas that surrounded the planet. The once vibrant blue and green world was now nothing more than a darkened orb, its surface marred by scars of devastation. "Captain," Lieutenant Cade's voice crackled in her ear, a hint of unease creeping in. "We're in range of the distress signal. No sign of any other ships nearby. It's just empty." Arden studied the view screen as they descended into the atmosphere, the air growing denser with each passing moment. The planet below, once inhabited, now looked like a graveyard, its cities reduced to ruins. She could see remnants of alien architecture, twisted metal structures half buried under layers of dirt and debris. "We're not here to admire the view, Cade," she replied, her tone sharp. "Get ready for anything." The crew moved swiftly, preparing for their first contact with whatever, or whoever, was left behind. Arden had led teams through hostile territories before, but there was something different about this planet. It wasn't just the silence that unnerved her. It was the feeling that something ancient and powerful, was watching them. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, its landing gear absorbing the impact of the rocky ground. Arden's boots hit the surface first, the dust crunching underfoot. She drew her sidearm, a sleek, high-powered plasma pistol that had saved her life more times than she cared to count. The rest of the crew followed suit, forming a tight circle around her, weapons raised, ready for whatever came next. The planet smelled of decay, not just plant life, but something deeper, something metallic. Arden's eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the jagged landscape. Towering rock formations stood like silent sentinels, casting long shadows across the barren wasteland. The sky above was a sickly shade of green, thick with clouds that seemed to pulse ominously. "There's movement," Cade said, his voice tense. Arden's eyes snapped to the left, where a figure staggered from the ruins of a collapsed building. At first, it was just a blur, an alien, barely recognizable, limping toward them. It was humanoid in shape but gaunt, with eyes wide and filled with a frantic desperation. The creature's skin, a dull shade of violet, was torn in places, revealing patches of raw, irritated tissue. Blood, thick and black, dripped from its wounds. "It's one of them," Arden muttered, her heart skipping a beat. It was a survivor, but not one that would live much longer. She knew the signs. This was no simple wound. The creature had been hunted. The alien's voice, weak but clear, rasped in their direction. "The HFY. They're hunting. You must leave." The words were barely audible over the wind, but the urgency in them was unmistakable. Arden took a cautious step forward, her hand raised in a gesture of peace. "We're here to help," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Tell us what happened." The alien's eyes flickered, but it collapsed before it could answer, crumpling into a heap of broken limbs and ragged breath. Arden knelt beside it, her fingers pressing against its neck, feeling for a pulse. There was none. "We're too late," she muttered. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, a low, rumbling growl echoing through the ruins. The crew froze, weapons raised, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Then it appeared. From the depths of the wreckage, a massive shadow emerged, something enormous, with scales like jagged obsidian and eyes that glowed with an eerie red light. It was HFY. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of serrated teeth, as it let out a guttural roar, the sound vibrating through the air. "Take cover," Arden shouted, instinctively pulling the survivor's body out of the way as her team scattered. The HFY was faster than any predator she'd ever faced, its movements fluid and deadly. It surged forward, its claws swiping through the air like razor-sharp blades. Arden fired, but the shots bounced harmlessly off its thick hide. The creature howled in fury and lunged at the nearest crew member. The battle had begun. Arden's mind raced as she scrambled to her feet. The stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. These creatures weren't just monsters. They were hunters, and they had just marked Earth's toughest species as their next prey. The jungle planet was unlike anything Arden had ever seen. The air was thick and humid, pressing against her skin like a wet blanket. Giant trees towered overhead, their twisted branches forming a canopy so dense it almost seemed to swallow the light. The ground was soft, soaked with moisture, and each step they took was accompanied by a squelch of mud and the sound of distant, eerie calls from the unseen wildlife. Arden's boots sank into the muck as she led her team forward, the dense foliage parting before them like a wall of green. The team moved in tight formation, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every shadow, every movement in the underbrush. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, never left her. "Keep your wits about you," Arden muttered to the team, her voice low. "These creatures know this place better than we ever will. Stay alert." The air hummed with tension, the jungle alive with unseen predators. There was something off about this place, a heaviness in the air, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something. Arden's gut twisted with a growing sense of dread, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to falter. Not now. Cade, her tactical officer, was close behind her, his hand tight on the handle of his rifle. "Captain, I'm not liking this," he said, his voice tight with unease. "There's a presence here, something unnatural." "I know," Arden replied, her gaze scanning the dense vegetation ahead. "We just need to keep moving. We're too close to turn back now." The distress signal had led them deeper into the jungle, toward a forgotten city, an ancient, crumbling structure buried beneath centuries of decay. According to their intel, it was here that the Xal-Far had first appeared, stalking the native species of the planet before they eventually vanished into myth. And it was here, Arden knew, that the key to stopping them lay. As they neared the city's edge, the trees began to thin, revealing glimpses of towering stone structures half buried in the earth. Massive, alien carvings covered the walls, depicting creatures like the Xal-Far, large, predatory beasts with glowing eyes and elongated limbs. The sight sent a chill down Arden's spine. Whoever had built this city had known fear. "We're almost there," Arden said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay sharp." The ground sloped downward, leading them into what appeared to be the city's heart. The ruins here were more intact, the massive stone pillars of the city rising like silent giants against the sky. But it wasn't the architecture that caught Arden's attention. It was the air itself. It was thick, heavy with a palpable sense of dread that seemed to press in from all sides. And then they heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from deep within the city. It rumbled like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Arden's pulse quickened as she turned toward the sound, her instincts screaming at her to run, to flee. But there was no escape. Not anymore. "Get to cover," she barked, signaling for the team to spread out. "It's close. They found us." No sooner had the words left her mouth than the jungle erupted into chaos. From the shadows, a massive shape lunged, its claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. The creature's eyes, red and feral, locked onto Arden, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. The Xal-Far was upon them. Arden fired first, but her shot went wide, ricocheting off the creature's thick hide. The Xal-Far snarled, its massive frame moving with terrifying agility, and it charged. One of her team members barely managed to dive behind a fallen pillar before the creature's claws raked across the stone, leaving deep grooves. "We're going to need a plan, Captain," Cade shouted, his voice strained as he fired at the beast. But the shots did little to slow it down. Arden's mind raced. They had to outsmart the creature. There was no way to overpower it. She took a breath, her eyes scanning the environment, looking for anything that could give them an edge. The city's architecture, the crumbled buildings, the vines hanging from the trees. They could use it all. "Fall back," Arden shouted, pulling Cade and the others into motion. "Get to the high ground. We need to draw it into the open." The team sprinted, ducking and weaving between the crumbling structures. The Xal-Far followed, its growls growing louder as it gained on them. But Arden was determined. If she could get it into a narrow alleyway between two ruined towers, she might just be able to trap it. The Xal-Far's glowing eyes locked onto her, its hunger unmistakable. And in that moment, Arden knew this was just the beginning. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a fight for survival. and Earth's toughest species was about to learn just how deadly the galaxy's most fearsome hunter could be. The jungle felt alive, its oppressive heat pressing in on Arden's crew as they made their way deeper into the ruined city. The air was thick with the scent of decay, mingling with the bitter tang of something far more dangerous. There was no mistaking it now. The SciFi were not just predators. They were something far older, far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Arden's boots echoed on the cracked stone streets, the weight of her steps heavier than ever. Her mind raced with the strange events of the past few days. The beast's relentless pursuit, the alien survivors' cryptic warnings, and now this, the city that should not exist. She came to a halt in front of what appeared to be a massive stone archway, its surface carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. The others gathered behind her, their expressions tense, knowing full well that every step they took brought them closer to the truth. "Is this the place?" Cade asked, his voice low and guarded. His rifle was still gripped tightly in his hands, ready for whatever came next. "This is it," Arden replied, scanning the surroundings. She stepped forward, fingers brushing against the stone. The carvings felt warm to the touch, as though the stone itself was alive, pulsing with an energy that was foreign to her. "What are we looking for?" Sergeant Ramirez asked, his eyes darting around nervously. The soldier had been quiet since they entered the city, his unease growing by the hour. Arden looked up at the towering structure. There was something about it that felt wrong, as though the city itself was watching them. "Answers," she said simply, though even she wasn't sure what kind of answers they would find. They moved through the archway, stepping into a grand hall where the air was thick with dust. The walls were covered in more carvings, this time showing scenes of war. Great battles fought between ancient civilizations and monstrous beasts. The carvings were almost lifelike, the faces of warriors frozen in terror, their bodies twisted in impossible angles. "This isn't just a city," Arden muttered to herself, taking in the enormity of the place. "It's a tomb." At the far end of the hall, they found what they were looking for, a pedestal, tall and weathered, standing in the center of a wide chamber. On it rested a small crystalline object, glowing faintly with an eerie light. Arden's breath caught in her throat. The artifact. But as she moved closer, the truth hit her like a wave. This wasn't just an object of power. This was a weapon. And it wasn't meant for the SciFi alone. The symbol on the pedestal was identical to the one the alien survivor had worn on his wrist, the same survivor whose body they'd found back on the surface. The realization struck Arden hard. The SciFi had been hunting for this artifact, but not for themselves. They had been hunting for the galaxy. "This is what they've been after," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Cade asked, stepping closer. Arden turned to him, her eyes sharp. "This isn't just a weapon. It's a catalyst. It can evolve species, make them stronger, faster, deadlier. It can change everything." She paused, her throat tightening. "And if the SciFi get their hands on it, they won't stop until they've reshaped the entire galaxy in their image." Cade's face paled. "So they're not just hunting for food, they're trying to control the galaxy." Arden nodded grimly. "Exactly. This artifact doesn't just evolve life, it manipulates it. And they're not the only ones who want it. The SciFi are the last remnants of an ancient race. They were once masters of the galaxy before something went wrong. Now they're trying to rebuild it, but on their terms." "Then we can't let them have it," Ramirez said, his voice hard. "We can't let anyone have it," Arden replied. "We destroy this, or the galaxy will never be the same." As she reached for the artifact, a soft hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the air grew thick with an unnatural pressure. The artifact glowed brighter, its light casting long shadows across the room. And then, from the darkness beyond, came a sound that froze their blood. A growl. Low, deep, and unmistakably close. The Xalfar had found them. Arden's heart pounded as the ground beneath their feet trembled. The walls of the chamber cracked, stones falling in slow motion as the sound of claws scraping against stone echoed through the halls. The hunt was far from over. With a snap of her wrist, Arden drew her weapon. She turned to her team, eyes blazing with determination. "We get out of here, or we fight for every last breath. Move." The Xalfar were coming, and they would not leave without the artifact. The ground beneath Arden's feet vibrated as the sound of the Xalfar's growls reverberated through the stone walls. Her pulse raced, each thud of her heart matching the pounding of her boots against the dust-choked floor. The artifact, the glowing crystal, was still in her hand, but it felt heavier now, its power pulsing like a living thing. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she knew they couldn't outrun the Xalfar. Not on this terrain. Not in this maze of ruined city blocks. "Move," Arden shouted, snapping her team into motion. They scrambled toward the exit, the dark hallway they'd come through now feeling like a death trap. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient and unnatural, like the very walls of the city were closing in on them. Every footstep echoed in the silence, louder and more threatening with each passing second. And then the roar came again, closer this time, shaking the floor beneath them. The Xalfar were right on their heels. Cade was at the front, his rifle raised and scanning the shadows. "Captain, we're not going to make it if we keep running. We need a plan." Arden's mind raced, but every option seemed to lead to a dead end. They couldn't fight the Xalfar head-on. They had no idea how many were out there, or what other traps the city might hold. And yet, standing still wasn't an option either. They had to get to the surface, back to the ship, and they had to do it fast. "Ramirez, take the rear," Arden ordered. "Cover our backs. Cade, lead the way. I'll bring up the middle." The team fell into their positions, moving as one, hearts pounding, breath ragged. The sounds of the Xalfar's growls grew louder, mingling with the thundering of their own footsteps. They could feel the weight of the beast's presence, even without seeing it. The air crackled with tension. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every sound felt like a trap. They reached the main hall, and Arden's eyes flicked to the high archways overhead. There, a narrow ledge running along the walls, just high enough for them to leap up to, just out of the reach of whatever was hunting them. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance. "Cade, on me," Arden called. She started to sprint, calculating the distance as she ran. Her muscles screamed, but she pushed them harder. The team followed, their breath quick and shallow, their hands tight on their weapons. And then the roar came, a deep guttural sound, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against stone. It was close. Too close. "Now," Arden shouted. In one fluid motion, she leaped toward the ledge, her fingers brushing against the rough stone. She made it, pulling herself up just as the first Xalfar appeared, its massive head emerging from the shadows, its eyes locked onto her, glowing red, filled with hunger. The creature's maw snapped open, revealing rows of sharp teeth as it let out a blood-curdling screech. But the team had already started to climb. Ramirez was up next, his hands pulling him toward safety. Cade followed close behind, the tension in his movements telling Arden he was ready to fight. The creature roared in frustration, its claws slashing at the stone, but it was too late. They were out of its reach, at least for now. They moved quickly along the ledge, staying low to the stone, their eyes darting to the crumbling city below. The Xalfar were closing in, but the ledge offered them a narrow window of escape. They had to make it to the end of the hall, just a little farther. Suddenly, the ground trembled again, and a loud crash echoed through the ruins. One of the stone pillars had fallen, creating a new opening in the wall. Arden's heart skipped a beat as the Xalfar appeared in the opening. It was massive, its scales black as night, its eyes burning with rage. It was unlike any creature they had seen before, a true apex predator. There's more than one, Cade muttered, his voice thick with dread. Arden didn't hesitate. She knew what had to be done. They couldn't keep running. The Xalfar were too powerful, too relentless. She had to finish this, or they wouldn't make it out alive. Ramirez, Cade, she said, her voice low but firm. On my mark, we make a stand. We don't let them get any closer. The team nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Their only hope now was to fight their way out. The Xalfar snarled again, its massive body moving with terrifying speed, its claws ready to strike. Arden's hand tightened around the artifact in her grip, her mind racing with the realization that this could be the key to stopping them, but only if they could survive long enough to use it. On my mark, Arden whispered, her gaze locked on the beast. The final battle was about to begin. The Xalfar's eyes burned with an otherworldly hunger, its gaze fixed on Arden, as if it could sense her fear and her resolve. The air seemed to ripple around them, as if the planet itself held its breath. The pulse of the artifact in her hand grew stronger, its faint glow lighting up the dim chamber. She could feel its power, seeping into her veins, urging her forward. On my mark, Arden repeated, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Her team was ready, each member holding their ground, weapons raised. But they all knew one thing. This was their last chance. The Xalfar let out another deafening roar, the sound shaking the crumbling walls around them. It lunged forward, its massive claws scraping against the stone floor, faster than Arden could have anticipated. The beast was a blur of motion, a terrifying combination of muscle and rage. Now, Arden shouted. She dropped to a crouch and fired first. The blast from her plasma pistol illuminated the chamber, slicing through the air with a high-pitched hum. The shot landed square on the creature's chest, but it barely slowed. The Xalfar's scales seemed impervious to her weapon's power, and the creature growled in fury, charging again. Ramirez was next, his rifle blazing as he aimed for the Xalfar's legs, trying to trip it. But the creature was too quick, its massive tail whipping around and knocking him off balance. He crashed into a stone pillar, a curse slipping from his lips as he struggled to get back on his feet. Cade, his face grim with determination, fired shot after shot, his rifle shaking in his hands with each blast. The creature recoiled slightly with each hit, but it was clear nothing was going to stop it. Arden's eyes darted to the artifact in her hand. She knew it was their only hope, but she needed a moment. A second to focus, a split second to channel the energy she could feel pulsing in the air around her. The Xalfar was almost upon them, its claws reaching for Cade. He was too close, too vulnerable. Arden's heart raced, and before she even thought about it, her legs were moving. She threw herself in front of Cade, diving into the creature's path. She fired again, but the shot went wild, missing its target. "Get down," she shouted to Cade. But the creature didn't pause. It was faster than they were. Its clawed hand shot toward Arden, ready to tear her apart. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to a single moment. The artifact in her hand flared brightly, as though answering some unspoken command. Arden squeezed her eyes shut and threw herself to the side, narrowly avoiding the massive claw. Her movements were instinctive, fueled by a desperate need to survive, and the artifact pulsed once more. This time, a bright flash of light erupted from the crystal, filling the room with a blinding glow. The Xalfar screeched in pain, stumbling backward as the light scorched its flesh. Arden's mind raced, her vision flickering with disorienting flashes of energy. The power within the artifact was overwhelming. She couldn't control it entirely, but she could feel it working. The creature staggered, its scales sizzling where the light had struck. It roared in agony, its body spasming as if caught in the throes of an intense transformation. "Get back," Arden yelled, stumbling to her feet. Arden swallowed, her throat dry. Her mind was spinning, but she couldn't let this opportunity slip away. The artifact was working. She just needed to push it further. With a growl, the Talifar lunged again, but this time it was slow, sluggish. The light from the artifact was affecting it in ways they hadn't anticipated. It was weakening, its movements jerky and erratic. Arden lifted the artifact high above her head, feeling the power surge once more. She focused all her will on it, her thoughts sharpening as she willed the energy to flow freely. The light around her intensified, the glow becoming a blinding beacon of raw power. The Talifar screeched again, but this time the sound was one of fear, not rage. The creature lunged forward one final time, but it was too late. The artifact flared, releasing a shockwave of energy that sent the Talifar flying back, its massive body slamming into the stone walls with a sickening crash. The air in the chamber crackled with the aftershock, and the oppressive tension that had hung over them lifted, leaving only the eerie silence in its wake. The Talifar was motionless, its form twisted and scorched, the once ferocious predator reduced to a charred husk. Arden's legs gave out, and she dropped to one knee, her breathing heavy, her heart pounding in her chest. "We did it," Cade whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. But Arden knew better. This battle was over, but the war was far from won. The galaxy's deadliest beasts were only a small part of the darkness that was about to rise, and she had no idea what it would take to stop it. The silence in the aftermath of the battle was almost suffocating. The air was thick with dust, the only sound the harsh breaths of Arden and her team as they tried to regain their bearings. The Talifar lay motionless at the far end of the chamber, its massive form still, charred, and twisted in ways that defied nature. The artifact's glow was fading, its once blinding light now a dull pulse in Arden's hand. She could barely stand, her legs trembling beneath her, but she forced herself to her feet. She couldn't afford to collapse now, not when they were so close to answers. The tension in the room hung like a storm cloud, and Arden knew they hadn't won yet. Not truly. The creature was down, but the danger wasn't gone. Not while the artifact was still in their possession. Cade's voice broke through the stillness. "Is it over?" Arden didn't answer at first. Her eyes were locked on the Talifar's still body, watching for any sign of movement. For a moment, she thought she saw a faint twitch, but it was nothing more than the aftershocks of the energy blast that had brought the beast down. She let out a long breath, her hand tightening around the artifact. "It's over for now," Arden said, though her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, she didn't know. She didn't know how long the Talifar would stay down, or if the others in their pack would come looking for revenge. And there was still the matter of the galaxy. What would happen if the artifact fell into the wrong hands? The thought sent a chill through her bones. "We need to move," she added, her voice firm now. "We can't stay here." Cade nodded, his face set in a grim expression. "Agreed. But where to?" The ship's still hours away. Arden turned, scanning the chamber around them. There had to be a way out, a path to the surface that didn't involve waiting for more Talifar to show up. As she moved, her gaze caught on something, a faint glimmer in the far corner of the room, hidden behind a pile of rubble. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she moved toward it, pushing aside chunks of stone and debris. "What is it?" Cade asked, his voice wary. "I don't know," Arden replied, her voice low as she crouched beside the rubble. "But I think it's important." She pulled away the last of the debris and gasped. A doorway. Not just any doorway, but one that had been sealed for centuries, its ancient stonework covered in moss and grime. It was almost hidden entirely, as though the city had tried to bury it. Yet there it was, an entrance carved into the stone, glowing faintly under the dim light. Ramirez stepped up beside her, his hand brushing over the intricate carvings on the door. "What's behind this?" Arden studied the symbols, her mind racing. She recognized them immediately. They weren't just any ancient script. They were Talifar markings, older than anything she'd ever seen. It was as if the Sci-Fi had been here long before the creatures they had become. This city, this structure, none of it made sense. There was something more, something hidden beneath the surface, and Arden felt a strange pull to uncover it. "I don't know," she murmured, "but I think it's the key to everything." Before anyone could respond, the ground shook again, this time with more force. It wasn't the tremors of the city. This was something different, something deliberate. The walls of the chamber groaned, as if something immense was moving beneath them. The artifact in her hand pulsed violently, and Arden's stomach churned. She looked up at her team. Their faces mirrored the same concern, the same realization. Something was coming. "We need to open this door. Now," Arden said, her voice urgent. Cade stepped forward and began pulling at the stone, using every ounce of strength to shift the ancient door. But it wouldn't budge. The stone was too heavy, too thick, the seals of the door untouched by time. "I can't get it open," Cade grunted, sweat dripping from his brow. Arden's heart hammered in her chest. They didn't have much time. The ground shook again, and this time, it felt like the entire city was coming alive. There was no more waiting, no more hiding. They had to move, and they had to move fast. She turned to Ramirez, who had already pulled out his plasma cutter. "We're cutting it open. Now." The hum of the plasma cutter filled the air, and the light from the artifact grew brighter, almost in response to the heat of the cutter's beam. Arden's pulse quickened, and her hand tightened around the artifact. Whatever was coming, they couldn't afford to be caught in the open. The beam of light from the cutter sliced through the stone with terrifying speed. As the door finally began to give way, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The team worked faster, desperate to open the doorway before whatever was coming could catch up to them. The passage beyond the door was narrow, barely wide enough for the team to move in a single line. It was dark, the air thick with the scent of ancient decay and something else, something sharp, like ozone, crackling in the atmosphere. Arden's breath came in shallow bursts as she led the way, the artifact still glowing faintly in her hand, its pulse matching the quick rhythm of her heart. Behind her, Cade and Ramirez kept their weapons raised, the low hum of their energy rifles adding an eerie rhythm to their movement. Every step felt heavier than the last, the walls pressing in from all sides as if the very stone was watching them. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, and the passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forgotten heart of the city. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were venturing into the past, a past that wanted to stay buried. The rumbling from before had not subsided. In fact, it had grown stronger, more relentless. It was as if the city itself was alive, responding to something. Something old. Something powerful. Arden quickened her pace, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could feel it now. The unmistakable weight of something ancient, something that had been dormant for eons, beginning to stir again. She wasn't sure if it was the artifact's energy or something else entirely, but it was undeniable. Whatever they had unleashed, it was waking up. Cade's voice came from behind her, low and tense. "What is this place?" Arden didn't answer at first, her eyes scanning the dark passage ahead. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint light, but it wasn't the same as the artifact's glow. This light was something older, more ancient, buried deep beneath the surface of the city. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight, "but we need to keep moving." They pressed on, the passage growing steeper as it wound its way down, spiraling deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to stretch forever. As they rounded another corner, they were met with a sudden drop, a sheer cliff face leading down into a cavernous space far below. At the edge of the drop, Arden could make out faint shapes, structures, ruins that stretched deep into the belly of the world. And in the center of it all, standing like a silent sentinel, was a massive, intricately carved stone platform. The platform itself was unlike anything she had ever seen. It seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, a deep, resonant hum that echoed in her chest. Arden's fingers tightened around the artifact. She felt its power surge again, stronger than ever before, and for the first time, she understood. This place was meant to contain something, and they were on the brink of unlocking it. "We need to get down there," Arden said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's where it's all been leading." Cade and Ramirez exchanged a look, their faces etched with skepticism and concern. But there was no time to debate. They didn't have a choice. Arden could feel the weight of something dark, something untold, pulling them toward the platform. It was like gravity, unavoidable, inevitable. Without hesitation, she motioned for the team to follow her as she began descending. The path was narrow, the stones slick beneath their feet. The climb down was treacherous, the air thick with the scent of forgotten centuries. But they made it to the platform. The moment they set foot on it, the ground beneath them rumbled again, louder this time, more violent. A shockwave of energy seemed to shoot from the center of the platform, spreading outward in concentric circles. The light from the artifact grew blinding, casting sharp shadows across the cavern. Arden's vision swam, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in the distance, a shadow, a figure moving within the dark. Then the ground split. It wasn't a crack. It was a tear, an opening, as if the very earth itself was being torn apart. From the fissure emerged a swirling darkness, like smoke rising from a wound, and at the center of it all, a massive, glowing crystal. It was enormous, towering above them, and it throbbed with an energy that was almost alive. Arden's breath caught in her throat. The crystal was the heart of this place. It wasn't just a power source. It was the key to whatever had been locked away here. The team instinctively raised their weapons, but they were too far from the crystal, too far from the heart of the power to do anything. And then the voice came. It wasn't a sound, exactly. It was a sensation, a pulse of thought, a presence that reverberated through their minds. "You shouldn't have come." The words weren't spoken, but they were felt, deep in their bones, in their very souls. It was a warning, and yet something more. The presence was ancient, filled with a knowledge that spanned millennia. Arden's hand tightened around the artifact as it pulsed once more, its light almost blinding in its intensity.